I'm Tom Stamm, the third generation to run the Fort Mitchell Garage. We took the Fort Mitchell Garage over in 1973, which is about 48 years ago. The earliest memory I remember, probably when I was 13 or 14 years old, is pumping gas for 20 cents a gallon. And they'd always ask for $1 worth of gas. That was 5 gallons of gas. Dad and Mom got married in 1926. Dad wanted an apartment down in Covington. Mom said, we're not living in Covington. We're gonna put up a tent and live in a tent if we have to until we build a house on my grandfather or my dad's land. So that's when we built a house in the back of the old Fort Mitchell Garage. When Grandpa retired from the business in 1946, he'd go to town for the guys, and as he got older, he kept his foot on a clutch, and he burned up the clutch coming up the hill. Well, they thought they'd put a steel clutch in. Well, he kept his foot on the clutch. It never wore out, but it got red hot when he hit the top of the hill. That clutch was red hot. So they knew his days going to town were finished. 90 years old. Oh, my sister, who was in a convent, called me and Hazel and wanted to know if she could have a meeting at our house. She had something important to tell us. Well, it was going to Africa and starting a school over in Africa, in Uganda. So Leo took her down the garage here and taught her how to work on cars and give her a set of tools, her and Sister Del Rita, and give her a lot of instructions on what to do and change a tire and the tools they needed. So when she went to Africa, she told Leo, she said, you know, you really helped us because we over here, the roads aren't that good and we've had a lot of flat tires and we know how to work on cars. She stayed over there about 18 years and came home, and she's still in very good health and doing very well. She just turned 82 years old. I never did go over because you had to take shots in order to go to Uganda, and I didn't want to take no shots to go. One of the things that she wrote back a letter, she says, we need toilet paper. She says, so hey, my wife got the idea to crush the toilet rolls and stuff them down the boxes, and she put little bits of hard candy in all around and put crackers in the boxes, and when they got those, they said, oh, was that good? Said the toilet paper saved us. When my grandfather had so many children, he had 13 children, and 2 of the girls wanted to get married. He said, we'll just have a double wedding. So they got 2 brand new 1936 Fords, black Fords for the wedding. And then during the Depression, we had hard times in the 1930s. And my Uncle Bob worked for his dad, who ran a butcher shop. And the business got so bad, he laid his son off, and his son lived above the garage. And he decided that he'd maybe try out working on cars or servicing automobiles. So they told him, they were just pulling his leg. They told him check the radiator on the car, and it was a air-cooled automobile. I forgot the name of the car, but anyway, he came back. He said, this car don't have a radiator on it. He said, I can't find out where to check it at. And they just kind of laughed about it. And so it wasn't long after that, he found a job over in Price Hill. I had my mother get me a brood of chickens every year, 25 chickens, and I'd put them in the basement of our home, and I'd put a 100-watt light bulb, so keep them warm in a little cage I made for them. And I got a banty rooster out of that bunch. And my dad used to walk from the garage up to the house and have lunch. He never went out for lunch. He always went to the house. So this banty rooster didn't like my dad because he wore one of those Stetson caps. And so he'd take out after him and peck at his heels. And my dad says, we're going to have to do something with that rooster. I can't walk up the house without him chasing me. So the next week we had that rooster for dinner on Sunday. One of the things I remember, my grandfather put, he raised bees and got honey from the bees, and he had the bees coming out on the parking lot of the Fort Mitchell garage. And I can remember going down, I used to like to sit in the automobiles and just pretend like I was driving, or see all the different interiors of the cars and the different smells of the cars. And I remember battling those bees trying to get into those cars. And but I never got stung anyway. If you didn't swat at the bees, they wouldn't bother you either. They just buzzed right into the hive and put their honey in there. I'll tell you one little story about my grandfather. He had a dog named Tenor. It was an Airedale, and that dog would follow him around everywhere. And a customer came to pick his car up, and he wanted to play a little joke on the customer. So he was standing up on the second floor of the garage, and we had a pond on the far side, and he took the customer's keys and he threw them out the window, threw them in the pond. He told Tenor, he says, go get those keys. Tenor went down, went in the pond, picked those keys up and brought them back up to him. We had Ben Tanner, we had Jimmy Henson, we had John Kukley, Jake Reeb, and myself, Tom. And this is only just a few of them. There was a couple more. We had Mac Stevenson, and we had, let's see, Mac McSpadden, Clinton White, and Frank Freiliger, and George Merle. We had quite a few working at the Fort Mitchell garage. But every once in a while I'd have to go up, and all these fellas had a drinking problem, and I'd have to go up the saloon and get them out of the saloon to come back to work. And I can remember even on Sunday, Jimmy Henson lived down in Covington on 12th Street, and there was a saloon down there that he frequented, and my Uncle John says, you go down and get Jimmy Henson, he's got to finish the job. Fella's got to do some long distance traveling Monday. So I had to go down, get him out of the saloon, take him out of the garage. He didn't have an automobile at the time. He rode a streetcar to work. And I went down, picked him up, took him out to the garage, and he worked all day Sunday finishing up that car. They could work. If they had a snoot full, they could work. It didn't bother them. Well, it was Art Averbeck, who was my cousin. It was Fred Vagides, who was a parts man. It was Ray Vagides, who worked in a body shop with me when I worked down there. It was my brother Bill, who elected not to go to high school, and he started working at the as a mechanic at the garage and running parts. And then there was Ralph Kukley. He didn't last long at the Fort Mitchell garage. He decided to leave and go over to Cincinnati and worked at a Ford dealership. And that was a cousin, Ralph Kukley. And
what about your great uncles?
There was my Uncle Carl, Uncle John, and Uncle Frank Freiliger, and my dad. They all worked at the Fort Mitchell garage. Oh, I guess when I was probably about 7 or 8 years old, I went down, just walked over the hill, and the body shop was in the basement of the Fort Mitchell garage. And my uncle, who started the body business at the Fort Mitchell garage, he was straightening a left front fender and a left rear fender on I guess it was about a 37 Studebaker. And in those days, they didn't have filler like we got today, that you could put in dents and fill them. So he was filing the metal, because they had plenty of metal on those old cars in those days. And when he finished the left front fender, it looked shiny and all polished up. And he started pecking on the left rear fender, and he got taking the dents out. And every time he'd hit the fender, I had a rubber mallet, and I was tapping on the fender he just straightened. He came over and felt that fender I was tapping. I had dents in that fender. He was so mad at me. He said, "You good old kid, get out of here." So I had to leave the body shop then. Frank Fraliger showed my cousin Ray and I how to do body work. In those days, we didn't have automatic, or I have hand buffers where you could buff the paint and make it look shiny. You had to rub it out by hand. And he painted a black Buick one time, and I never forget that. Ray and I, we rubbed on that thing all day, and he came over and looked at it. He says, "You missed a couple spots." We'd have to get the rubbing compound out and rub some more on it. But those were the days. I love to make cars look good. I wasn't too much on mechanical work. So when I get through with the car, we painted the wheels, and they had stripes around the wheels. So when I painted the wheels, I'd take a little striping brush and I'd spin that wheel, come around and make a stripe, put another stripe down the wheel. If it was painted red, the wheel's red, we'd put a white stripe on it, or put a gold stripe. And then we'd stripe the automobile. If it was an older car built in the 30s, we'd put a stripe down the side of the car around the windows. And those are some of the things that really I love to do. Grandpa started this business September of 1900. Opened up the blacksmith shop. In those days, he was living across the street in one of Ben Decker's homes, and his first son was born, Carl Kukley, in 1900. And Grandpa was working for Ben Decker at that time, who had a blacksmith shop and a florist shop. And Grandpa was running the blacksmith shop. And he said, "If I can run this blacksmith shop and make money for this Ben Decker, the land across the street became available for $1,050. He said, I'll buy that land over there and start my own blacksmith shop." Well, he did that. He went to the bank and borrowed the money, and he started his own blacksmith shop. And he built a building to house the blacksmith shop. Well, Mr. Decker couldn't get nobody to run his blacksmith shop, so he told Grandpa he had to get out of his home that he was renting across the street. So Grandpa built a little frame house up on the top of the hill, which stood till about 12 years ago. He finally tore it down, and he started raising his family over there. But anyway, they eventually made up. He and Mr. Decker finally eventually made up, and they became customers of the garage, and everything worked out. When my grandfather opened up the blacksmith shop, he had automobiles coming up a hill, and they were low on gasoline. They needed some gas. Well, grandfather had a 55-gallon drum of gasoline that he used to power his engines with. So he said, well, I got a little gas back here. I can give you enough to get home with. So after several months of this going on, he decided to sink some gasoline tanks in the ground, 3,000-gallon tanks, and put a pump in that he could pump the gas up in a bowl and then let it flow down into the car gas tank. So he said that was the greatest day when the automobiles took over and the horses got off the highway, because the automobiles would backfire and spook the horses, and then they'd tear his wagons up that he built and made wheels for. And he said when the automobiles came in, he said, he told his 3 boys, he said, I'll build you a shop. And that's when, in 1922, he built the Fort Mitchell garage. So the 3 boys ran it, and a brother-in-law, they all ran the shop. And my grandfather never did work on cars. He just kept the blacksmith shop going and made tools for him and straightened axles that were bent. Kaiser built ships during the war, so for 5 years he built ships, and when the war was over, the Second World War, he decided he's going to build some automobiles because automobiles were scarce in those days. So he got busy and built. He had another partner called Joe Fraser, and they built a Kaiser and they built a Fraser automobile. In 1947, they sold so many of them, they couldn't build them fast enough. So in 1951, we took on the Kaiser Fraser dealership. And this came about when the front of the building caught fire because of some kids out in the Kentucky club got too much to drink. At 1 o'clock in the morning, they're heading down the highway and they decide they play follow the leader. Well, the first car made it through between the gas pumps and the building. The second car came down, hit the first gas pump, knocked it into the office, and caught the whole front of the building on fire. We had all these Kaiser Frasers sitting in the building. The heat got so strong that it blistered the chrome on the cars. This is the gas pumps, and you can see where you drove up and could pump gas. And imagine standing out on the highway pumping gas. We had to replace all the chrome, had to redo the front of the building, and we started selling the cars again now, the Kaiser Frasers, until my dad decided he didn't want no part of handling the books for the Kaiser Frasers, and he gave it to one of our customers, John Bott. Well, John Bott had a bad habit of going out to the Latonia racetrack, and my mother kept saying to my dad, says, Ed, he says, we're making money on these new cars we're selling. Where's the money at? Oh, he says, it'll come, it'll be here. Well, they got a call from the bank. They were $100,000 in debt. This guy was taking these cars out and put the garage in debt at the racetrack. So they had to borrow money back and get back in business again. We were working in a body shop, and Roger Kookley, our cousin, was running the mechanical part upstairs. And Roger's father had died previously to this here, so Roger thought he would be the head honcho and run the thing. And I told Roger, I said, this don't work that way. He was trying to tell me how to run the body shop. He said, from now on, he said, you'll work upstairs and the body shop will run by itself. I said, I don't think so, Roger. So I told my brother Leo about it, and I said, I think we need to pull out and let Roger have this old building, and we'll just get ourselves a new building. And Leo and I looked for a year before we found where we are now. And it was a big hotel stood here, and the owner was a customer of ours who owned the land, and he said, you need to come down here and build your garage down here where the hotel is. He said, there's plenty of room down here. And we decided there wasn't enough room down there, but eventually after a year looking around, why we decided we were going to build on that land. And this is how we arrived here. So we put the Fort Mitchell Incorporated up for sale, and we had an auction advertised 3 days, and we had a lot of people bidding on the Fort Mitchell Garage Incorporated, and we had a good attorney bidding for us. And after about 15-20 minutes, when the auctioneer finally finished, we shot the last bid in, nobody else topped it, and he said, sold to Tom and Leo, and we were so excited about that, buying the Fort Mitchell Incorporated. Otherwise, we were going to call the building, or call the business the Stamm Brothers, really, Stamm Brothers Garage. We were looking to open up, and for some reason or other, they found out we didn't have a business license. In order to get a business license, you had to go to Frankfurt to get it. So my wife Hazel and my sister-in-law Rosemary, who was married to my brother Bill, they got in their car on one afternoon. They drove all the way to Frankfurt, picked up that business license, came home and flashed it, says, we got the business license, you can open up. So anyway, the girls helped out quite a bit getting this business going. They sent out notices to people telling them we were moving, and it just worked out great. Elmer Kalin was one of the presidents down in Louisville, and he had an orchestra. They used to play German music. He had an accordion player, and they played for a dance down there, and he told me, he said, I just built a new garage myself, and I had a grand opening. He said, when you get your new garage built, he said, I'll come up and we'll have a party up there, and I'll play for your grand opening. Well, we set up a little place in the new building here where the people could sit and have lunch, and we put all kind of banners up outside, and we had my niece as a clown, and she directed people in, and we just had a great time that Saturday evening. Well, we did a lot of advertising in the church bulletins, and I had a sponsored a baseball team. We called it the Fort Mitchell Garage Little League. And all those little kids I had on my baseball team over the 10-year period I had that team, they all come back to see us. When I retired, I was, what stirred all that up, they thought I had prostate cancer, and I told Leo about it, and Leo said, you know, Tom, he said, we need to start thinking about who's going to take the business over, because if anything happens to you, I don't want to run this business myself. So we kept thinking who could take it over. I said, well, Ron's run the business, and he's having a little tough time with his partner he's in business with. I said, I think maybe he'd make a good one to come into the business. So after meeting with my cousin Ray and talking it over, he said, why don't I sit in on a meeting with you and we'll have Ron come down. That's my son, Ron. And we'll have him come down and we'll talk this thing over. Well, after meeting with Ron, talking things over, Ron agreed he'd come in and take over. And this was in '96. And that's when I went in and retired, and when Ron came in. Well, my dad, I asked him for a raise one time, and he says, you make as much money as myself and our two owners, John Kuechly and Carl Kuechly. But I said, Dad, I'm married now. I said, it ain't enough to live on. So anyway, he was kind of tight with his money, but he had a hand crank adding machine. You punch the numbers in, you pull the lever. You punch the numbers in, you pull the lever. Then you hit total and you pull the lever and give you a total. He didn't trust that adding machine. He'd run up the column. He could add that in his mind, and he'd check the adding machine. When we moved down here, this was on a Saturday. We moved everything over the weekend. We had everything set up on a Monday. We put him in the car and brought him down here, and he sat in this office down here, and he was just like it was setting up in the old Fort Mitchell garage. We had all the books down here, the safe, everything. And he sat in that office there and ran the place until he retired here. My dad didn't like electric cash register, so we had a hard time convincing him that he could learn how to use it. He said, yeah, what if the electric goes out? So, but anyway, he took on the job of using a new electric cash register, and wasn't long the electric went off. He got no way of getting the cash register open. He said, go up and get that old blue cash register. He says, I ain't gonna get in this problem again. So I told my mom about it. I said, I had to get the old cash register down there. She said, you get rid of that thing. She said, he can't read the tape on it anymore, and he spends the whole night down there trying to read that tape. So we put the electric cash register back, convinced him that the electric wouldn't stay off that long, and he finally liked it. It was his favorite color. I painted that cash register back in the 50s, painted blue. I can't stay away from the place. It makes my day when I come down and talk to all the mechanics and see how they're doing, seeing what changes have taken place. Some of these mechanics we have been with us like 45, 46 years, and some of them been down here 48 years, so we got a good crew working for us. Well, Ron's the fourth generation to take the business over, and we were just talking with the other siblings, and it looks like there's going to be nobody else to take the business over. So at this point, we're not sure where the business is going to go at the end. So with electric cars coming out, it looks like things are going to change. There's not as much maintenance on the electric cars as the gasoline cars. So we'll just have to wait and see. Big changes are making way into the business. This was my first car, a 1938 Lincoln Zephyr, and when I was 15 years old, my uncle gave me two cars. One of them was a rollover, and the other was a burnt car. It caught fire. So I used the parts off the burnt car and put them on this Lincoln, and I built this Lincoln back, and when I was 16 years old, I started driving it to school. I painted it maroon and cream colored and put big white wall tires on it, as you can see. And that car had a V12 engine in it, and it only got about like 8 miles to a gallon. And my uncle suggested we put a V8 in the car, and the V8 wasn't as long as the V12, so there was about 2 feet of distance between the radiator and the motor. The car ran very normal until you got into the city driving, then it started heating up. You'd have to pull over and let it cool down. We never did figure out how to put a fan on it, but I drove it the whole time like that. So I just knew the problems we had with heating up. Well, this Tucker car back in 1948 had an advertisement in one of the trade magazines, and we were looking to sell cars, start a dealership. So my Uncle John, he contacted Tucker, who was making the automobile, and he told him, yeah, he says, you can have a dealership, but you got to build a showroom. So in 1948, John Hemmer, who was a customer of ours, he looked over our building. He said, yeah, we can put you a showroom up, and we'll put you a little shop in the back part of the showroom where you can work on cars. So that worked out good. My dad and my Uncle John went up and watched them build these cars up in Chicago, and it had seat belts and disc brakes. It had a lot of the safety features in the car that we got today, and they were the first ones to put the door wrapped into the roof, which made more headroom when you got in the car. So it was a very nice automobile, drove nice. And when we finally got the showroom built, they brought the car down and they flew it in, and started driving it from Chicago. They flew it in on a transport plane, and they drove it from the airport, Greater Cincinnati Airport, down to the Fort Mitchell garage, and we had it on display. We had big crowds of people around it looking at the car. He went to trial with his financing. They closed him down. Then we lost the demonstrator, and then my Uncle John decided we'd go up and take on a Crosley dealership. And a Crosley dealership, they made the motors in Cincinnati, and the body parts they put together up in Marion, Indiana. And up in Marion, Indiana, it was about a 4-hour drive to get up there. In those days, we didn't have any way of getting the automobiles down, like having a transport truck, transport cars like they do today. So we took 6 drivers in a 41 Mercury, and a driver that was 7 people in a 41 Mercury, and we went up to the factory, and we carried along a cooler in the back, a tub with soft drinks, and a couple loaves of bread and some lunch meat, and we went up and picked up 6 cars and drove them back to the garage, and they sold those, and we went up and got more of them, and we did this here for quite a while, picking up these cars. They had the engine governed for 35 miles an hour, so you can imagine it took twice as long to get home. We didn't get home till 1 o'clock in the morning, leaving in the afternoon. But we all made it home. Nobody could pass anybody. You had to just stay right in line. My brother Leo had a Mustang. he picked up from a customer, and he said to me, he said, "We got a Mustang sitting down in our parking lot. It's been here over a year." I said, "Yeah, but it's a mess." I said, I don't think it's worth fixing up." He said, "Well, I'll tell you what, if you don't fix it up, I will." So I did. I took the thing in, we pulled it apart, and within about a year, we had it back on the road, had to buy another motor for it. And Leo, at that time, wanted a 4-speed in his transmission in his car, and he found one, and he said, "Tom, how'd you like to have my old 3-speed?" I said, "Yeah, I like it, as this one here only had 1 gear left in it." So anyway, I put that 3-speed in this here one, and this is the one we're using today. And then found out when I got it out on the road, the thing vibrated. Well, here, I guess whoever had it before had a big dent in the drive shaft and it shook the car so bad you couldn't have set in it. So we put another tube in the drive shaft, and it's been running good ever since. The car was originally poppy red, so we painted it back poppy red. And everywhere I went with the car, Leo's was a dark green. Well, nobody paid any attention to Leo's. And Leo said to me, he says, "Mine's gonna become red." He says, "When can you take mine apart and paint it red?" So we spent about 6 months taking it apart, painted it red, and his daughter's got it now, and it's just as pretty as mine is.